So you could see it coming. Luca Magnotta, accused of killing, dismembering, sexually violating, and eating Chinese student John Lin, is apparently a paranoid schizophrenic. That's the latest big development in one of the sickest Canadian crime stories in Canadian history. The court releasing a letter from a psychiatrist this week who says Magnotta was diagnosed over 13 years ago while still a teenager, even hospitalized several times. Magnotta, then known by his birth name, Eric Newman, was put on antipsychotic medications. But of course, he didn't always take his meds. Folks, we know the direction this one is going in. 3 words: not criminally responsible. And so it's time for some Canadian common sense. Here we go again. NCR, not criminally responsible. The old insanity plea, a get-out-of-jail-free card from psychiatrists. Look, paranoid schizophrenia is a terrible disease of the mind. It causes tremendous suffering, paranoia, auditory hallucinations, voices in the head, agonizing fear. It's got to be awful. But here's what's more awful: the suffering felt by the victims and the victims' families. John Lin's mom, nearly a year after her son's killing, has declared that she is no longer having the will to live. She certainly is not alone, not by a long shot. I want to run a clip for you here, snippets of emotion from Carol Dadelli. She's the mom of Tim McLean, who was killed by schizophrenic Vince Lee on a Greyhound bus near Winnipeg. And then I want you to see Christine Russell, the wife of Sergeant Ryan Russell, killed by a snowplow driven by Richard Kashkar, NCR, in Toronto.
This man will not have a criminal record for what he did to my child.
In a verdict of not criminally responsible, my family, most likely myself, will have to fight this for the rest of my life.
What has to happen in Canada for somebody to be held accountable?
Tim McLean, Ryan Russell, 2 lives, too many, brutally cut short by people who were deemed NCR, not criminally responsible, with no closure for the victim's family at all. Vince Lee is already getting a taste of liberty, mingling with the local community in Selkirk just a few short years after mutilating and eating McLean on that bus. Kashkar, the cop killer, with the right behavior, if he responds to his meds, he too may also enjoy some of the same freedoms from the mental hospital in just a matter of years. Remember Montreal cardiologist Guy Turcotte? He stabbed his 2 young kids to death in 2009. That's not even 4 years ago. 5 years old. That's right, Olivier, 5 years old. Sophie, only 3 years old. The 2 kids killed by their pop while they slept in their beds. And who could possibly have thought that the father, much less a human being, would create and commit such a horrible act? But apparently he was bummed out over his failed marriage, wasn't of sound mind. Now he's a free man. We're talking less than 4 years later. Doctors say he's gotten over his little episode. But what about Isabelle Gaston? She hasn't gotten over it. The mom of those 2 innocent victims, devastated for life. In her victim impact statement, she's declared that she would trade her life for just 5 minutes with her 2 young kids. Her anguish is so great, she says she can't get life insurance because insurance companies consider her to be a high risk. The memory of her dead kids with her every second of every day, re-victimized by Guy Turcotte's release. The entire family re-victimized. Isabel said recently that her sister bumped into the cardiologist killer at the local mall. But even if the killer had not been released, women like Carol Dadelli and Christine Russell are facing constant hearings and reviews, a constant never-ending battle to keep the Vince Lees and Richard Kashkars off the streets as long as possible. Haven't they suffered enough? In the case of Magnotta, hasn't John Lin's family suffered enough? When I spoke recently about Richard Kashkar, I suggested he should remain institutionalized at least until Sergeant Ryan Russell's little boy turns 38, the age of his dad's death. That's the kind of thinking our courts should at least consider. John Lin's parents should go to the grave knowing their son's killer is still atoning for his sins. It's time to fully consider the perspective from the other side of the ledger, the victims. Tory Bill C-54 intends to reform the system. I hope they're serious. But in the meantime, if and when Luca Magnotta is found guilty, the only justice will be a conviction of first-degree murder, not some lame apologetic diagnosis of not criminally responsible. And that's Canadian common sense. Magnotta madness. It's been revealed that alleged murderer Luca Magnotta, on trial for killing, sexually desecrating, and eating victim John Lynn, has been previously treated by a psychiatrist for being a paranoid schizophrenic. When this is all said and done, will he be deemed not criminally responsible, to be set loose within a few years when some unaccountable person claims that he's left his demons behind him, that he's okay now, as long as he stays on his meds, that he's no longer a threat to society? Joining us now for more is a former cop, now a crime consultant, Ross McLean. Ross, let's just get this out of the chute, get it out of the way. Are psychiatrists today, for all intents and purposes, hired guns for criminal lawyers?
Well, perhaps they can be, Charles. I mean, the idea of psychiatry, while it's good medical practice, they do things, they work to help a lot of people, a lot of it still is a bit of black magic. And they can label things 3 or 4 different ways based on if you look around to find the psychiatrist that you want. That's for sure.
There's nobody with a shred of common sense anywhere on the planet that I can find to come on this show and tell me that someone who allegedly, I'll use the legal language, that someone who allegedly confines, cuts up, murders, and sends body parts to political offices and schools. There's nobody I can find on this planet who says that a person who does all those things allegedly is someone who is of sound mind. But why does that mean that we have to roll the dice and perhaps put him out on the street a couple of years later with the caveat, well, we think we have the honor system in this country and he'll be on his meds, and as long as that happens, everything's okay?
Oh, Charles, you're bang on about that. We've been rolling the dice on mental health issues and criminality in this country for as long as I can remember, as long as I've been doing any sort of law enforcement. We see right now with Luca Magnotta, in this particular case in 2005, he had done a crime, a fraud with a lot of money. He was going to be sentenced, and then the psychiatrist letter comes out, and boom, his sentence was reduced. I think it was by about 80% or so, based on that psychiatrist letter. And the courts knew that he was a problem. The psychiatrist knew that he was a problem. They just let him go, and he was out doing criminal acts not long after he got out of that one. He was out working as a male prostitute. So my question is, we are rolling the dice on this. When are we going to hold the medical community and the medical boards of health responsible for letting loose people who they know who are paranoid schizophrenic and violent, and they tend to go off their meds? Where's their responsibility come in this? Instead, as you say, they're rolling the dice. I think that's a great metaphor for it, Charles.
Well, Ryan, first of all, it's not, and one of the reasons that we run into a lot of trouble in this country is because once someone is labeled a person with a mental illness, schizophrenia, paranoid schizophrenia, all the people in this country who unfortunately have to deal with this in their own families every day, they start to think that when we say people like this should be in jail, they start to think that we're talking about members of their families. And here's the problem with that. Yes, you can be paranoid schizophrenic. You can be a lot of things that are diagnosed in the psychiatric Bible, what have you. But you still have to have sick, demented values to, in a premeditated way, engage in the course of behavior that's alleged against Magnotta. It's not just about paranoid schizophrenia. It's not just about mental illness. It's about sick values, sordid values.
No, you're exactly right on that. And you see, this is the point that people don't quite get sometimes when we come to dealing with these evil monsters. Yes, you can have mental issues, and yes, you can also have evil practice values and behaviors, and you can mix the two together. But the fact that you have got some mental issues does not take away the fact that you don't know that you're doing evil. So in this particular case, I believe with Magnotta, you're going to see that based on the period of time and the way he acted this out, the way he plotted this, the way he behaved. I mean, he wasn't psychotic for 5 years at a time, you know, out of his mind. You're going to find that they're not going to be able to use that defense here, if you will, that he was not criminally responsible. He knew what he was doing. He knew that it was criminal. He knew that he was murdering someone. I believe that's what will be shown in the court. I'm pretty confident about that.
Well, look, I'm hoping that the jury assesses things the way they ought to be assessed. Yes, he's got mental issues, but this is one allegedly evil SOB. Now, here's the question. What about the defense? I mean, won't the defense rest its entire case on how this is a sick man? We've got to protect him from society for sure, but we can't be punishing him like a common everyday murderer. I guess the premise being that everyday murderers never have any kind of illness. They're just people who one day deliver the mail and on a different day decide to kill the people receiving the mail.
Yeah, for the defense, this is a lot like, it's a bit of a poker game for them as they decide what defense they're going to use here. I mean, they've already tried in the preliminary trial to see how the judge is going to play this. They started objecting to just about every piece of evidence that the Crown wanted to bring in the preliminary trial, and the judge just looked at them, is my understanding, and said, no, objection overruled. No, objection overruled. No, objection overruled. So the judge is not going to take any funny business on this or play it like, yeah, let's let in every possible problem, every possible excuse. The judge isn't going to let that happen. So the defense knows that now. So their question is, Charles, do they go all in and try and go for the not criminally responsible? If they go all in for that and it falls the other way, and they say, no, no, he knew what he was doing, that puts the first-degree murder charge that much tighter on the client. So he might be better to argue somehow between first and second-degree murder as a way of hoping to save 10 or 15 years off of Magnata's sentence. It's a poker game.
Raj, what's the significant difference our audience would want to know between what happened to John Lynn and what John Lynn, the victim of allegedly Magnata, what happened to him, and what happened to McLean, Vince Lee's victim on the Greyhound bus? What's the bright red line of separation that you as an expert can draw for us based on your police career?
Well, it's this. They had many, many eyewitnesses, of course, in that bus beheading that took place. Lots of eyewitnesses, the jury and the judge, everybody knew exactly how he behaved to explain perhaps how far detached he was from reality. You know, part of what's going to be the problem for the Magnata defense here is the murderer is allegedly videotaped. So the Crown and the judge and the jury are going to be able to see exactly how he was behaving. And if you're wildly out of your mind, can you work and operate video equipment? Stop, do another take? I mean, my understanding is the police probably have the unedited video as well. So that's going to show that he knew what he was doing. He knew that he was murdering somebody. And that's what you need for a premeditated first-degree murder.
Did Vince Lee not know that he was shopping for a knife? Did Vince Lee not know that he was getting on a bus? Did Vince Lee, I mean, I could go on, but I'm just saying that I can take exactly what you're saying and make the same case that Vince Lee knew what he was doing when he did it.
No, you can make that case, and that's why we need a jury to sit down and hear all the actual facts in it. My point on the Magnata is his went on for months and years, his plotting and planning about being a liar and cheating, and that's what paranoid schizophrenics do. Yeah, you might have a case on that Greyhound bus to say that maybe he knew what he was doing, maybe, but this is where you have to look at the degrees of psychoticness. You know, there's degrees to it. And does it go into the red zone or does it stay sort of around the middle? That's what the juries will fight with, Charles.
But Raj, this is what's driving the Canadian people psychotic. And I'm using psychotic in this case, obviously, as a metaphor. Because what they're hearing is a system that is spending more time sort of navel-gazing at psychiatry as opposed to punishing behavior. We want to punish misdeeds. That's what we want as a people.
No, we want that. You know what? You make the argument, and I believe that's why we need to have our courts public. We need to be able to see video, audio of testimony. We need to have more accountability and more transparency in the areas of mental illness. Listen, I could tell you some stories about mental illness that would curl your toes, Charles, about what goes on in the streets and what's out there and what's permitted. And the general public doesn't know about it. I will guarantee you there's some of your viewers who have got family members or know of people who've been through issues like that. And it's not talked about, it's not transparent, it's not accountable. So it absolutely needs to be dealt with. And look, I can want to forgive somebody, for something, or I can feel empathy for somebody, but you still do the time if you did the crime. That doesn't excuse the punishment.
I just don't. I can't stand these trials being turned into psychiatric seminars as opposed to what they're supposed to be about, instruments of justice. That, you know, justice gets left on the in a ditch somewhere on the side of the road. Ross, I know you've got lots of stories to tell us. We want to hear them. We'll bring you back very soon. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks very much, Charles.